Being here today. We only have a Stanford game and the Pumpkin Festival and about 17 other things happening today, but you've made time to be with us, and we're very pleased about that. On behalf of the Friends of Edgewood, I welcome you here today for a history afternoon. My name is Mitch Postal, and I'm the president of the San Mateo County Historical Association, and I'll be your moderator. There's a challenge. There's 12 panelists and 2 speakers besides that, so there's 14 of us, and we all want to get out of here before midnight. So it's going to be my job to sort of keep things moving. So if I seem rude, if I seem like I'm distant or uninterested, I'm not. It's just that it's my job to kind of move things along, so I apologize to everybody way in advance. I also would like to just maybe begin things by giving a little bit about the early history. What today's meant to be is really more recent events and personal recollections rather than a straight historical lecture on the place. And I'm going to just give you a little bit of background, and then Nita Spangler is going to give some background about some of the early families as well. But the panelists themselves then will tell more personal experiences. And so the first panel will be mostly about what this place was like before the state and the county became involved, and then the second panel talks about afterwards. And so that's how we've divided it up. So when you look at this land, I mean, you can almost see our California Indians that were here, the particular people that inhabited this place in the Redwood City area in general called the Lampshin. Okay, now you might say, oh, I thought it was the Ohlone. Well, the Ohlone was the language group, and there were about 10,000 Ohlone that stretched out from Contra Costa down to Monterey County, but the people would never have called themselves Ohlone. They would have called them, their political affiliations were much smaller, local tribes as they're called now, and the people around here would have said they were Lampshin. They did have contact with the Spanish in 1769 when Gaspar de Portola came through here, and then in 1776 when Juan Bautista de Anza was on his way to establish a mission and a presidio up in San Francisco. And when they got this far, the Indians, the Lampshin, were complaining about the people to the north, the Salsan, because they were very warlike and impossible to get along with and so forth. Anza didn't have any problems with them, but it did indicate that not all the people got along all the time. The mission and the presidio were established in 1776, and then all this land became part of the lands that were controlled by the Mission San Francisco de Asís up in San Francisco. In 1822, there was the Mexican Revolution, and California becomes part of Mexico now. And the lands in this area and throughout California, in part anyways, are divided up between very influential families in the form of land grants. And one of the largest, or the largest land grant on the peninsula was given to the Arguello family. Theirs was Rancho de las Pulgas, which stretched from the middle part of San Mateo all the way down to East Palo Alto at San Francisco Creek. More than 35,000 acres just by that one family. As a matter of fact, all the way up until 1877, the Arguello family still controlled this tract of land here. Then a succession of very important families came to own the land. And with that, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, who's Nita Spangler. She was a Parks Commissioner and also president of the San Mateo County Historical Association. And Nita, could you tell us a little bit about some of the families that were here?
I want to add one bit. I'm the oldest living ex-president of the Historical Association. If you didn't hear, I'm bragging. I'm the oldest living ex-president of the Historical Association. All right? This piece of property, I would like you to think a little bit about in the global terms, as ridiculous as that may sound to you, because there were some people who came in here and they were very global people. And the Indians themselves were very global people because they lived between here and the valley up here and the bay. And Mama could say to one of the kids, "Go down and get me some fish," and they'd run down, and they would run down Edgewood Road. So there was some interesting traffic, some interesting things at that time, and the Indians did engage in trade with other Indians. So they came from where we don't know altogether, but there are people out there studying it, and you too might like to dip your finger into the history bag and do a little research on some of these things. The first people to occupy this property were the Indians, and they had a regular traffic line down Edgewood Road, unpaved. Nothing happened there until much later. And when you drive it, you may notice some of the same curves. I've got one of their oak trees in my backyard. It was an easy run, and people are still using that for their health. They walk, run, or shuffle by my front line. The first house that was put up here is unknown, if there was a house. But the fellow who put the first house up here was a fellow named John Isaac, who was the son of John Isaac, who was the son of John Isaac, who was the son of John Isaac. And this is in England. And the younger John found he had a stepmother he couldn't live with, and he turned to the Mormons. Now, this was in the 1850s. And he turned to the Mormons, and he became a Mormon immigrant. He had relatives, that's how he knew about it. He came over, and by then the Mormons had established stations along the way to pick up these people and give them clothing that they needed and so on, and send them on their way. And he ended up in Salt Lake City. He was a bright boy. He had friends and relatives there, and he became a printer. And he eventually ended up living in Redwood City. So we have an international. No, that's fine. We have an international man. But when he his first career was in Salt Lake, and there were problems, and he moved, and he was down in San Bernardino for a while. And as he became a Californian, he gave up his last newspaper, and he arrived in Southern California at the time the citrus boom was underway. And I have recently seen some pictures of what happened down Southern California, and I can't believe how many orange trees were planted so early in the game. But when the oranges started coming on the trees, they had a transportation problem, they had market problems, and he entered into that because he was a smart boy. He, at one point in his life, was appointed the Agricultural commissioner. And I'll let you look up all these dates. I can't carry them in my head anymore. But I want you to think about the odyssey of this guy before he arrived here. And when he came, he bought this property, and he needed a house on it. And there was a mechanics fair in San Francisco in the 1890s. And they closed up, and they had some surplus material, so he bought a house and made a swap with the Southern Pacific. If you take my house down to Redwood City, I'll give you some asphalt from the fair, and thus did they build the first house here. He and his wife did not have any children at that point, and she used to drive him in the buggy from here down to the train station so he could go to his job as the agricultural commissioner. Think about that for a commute. There was lumbering, of course, up in the hills in back, and there were many attempts at farming, but the land up on the hilltops is pretty sparse for good topsoil. So nobody was terribly prosperous. But it must have been an interesting time for this region to have that kind of traffic coming. And there was a fellow named Willard Whipple who got a hold of a steam engine and built the first mill up there, and you can see the side of that mill because there's a house up there now on the other side of the fault. And Willard Whipple was a success, and he's another interesting fellow to observe because he was part of the colonization party that came out with Brannan, and so these folks had neighbors. They could see the smoke from the chimney, which is the definition of a neighbor, and they had that kind of company. But things didn't go too well as being the state agricultural commissioner because John Isaac ran into politics, got fired, and had to leave. And he went to work as a newspaperman in San Francisco, and had a charming, absolutely superb experience trying to get into the then very, very new name blank, one of the private clubs, not the Pacific Union. What's the next one? The what?
Bohemian?
But yeah, ran into the Bohemian Club because he showed up in a tweed suit, and they expected him to come to work in a formal attire. That's another story, but that's what makes research fun, and I encourage all of you, no matter what you've done, when or where, to pick on something and go looking and see what fun you can have. And you'll be the first to discover it, or you'll be one of the first. At any rate, the property was sold to the next owner of the property, and who's going to talk about?
So are we ready to talk about the Taylor family, Nita? Finkler? Oh,
no,
okay.
But, who is coming next?
That's you, Nita.
Oh, okay. Surprise. Yes. You will have a surprise lecture. At any rate, the Taylor family did move in, and later, after there had been some more development, some more buildings built, and so on and so forth, and they're here today. And now I will.
Nita, before you get away, did you in your research didn't you do an interview with the grandson of Mr. Isaacs himself?
I did.
Did you want to tell a little bit about that?
Well, he was a school teacher down in he had lived in Redwood City. I think he was a graduate of Sequoia. And he was trying to check on his father. Incidentally, John Isaac, the younger, who lived here, wrote a little biography about himself, and that was a very helpful thing in researching. He was, as I said, a very bright guy, and he married a very resourceful woman. I would like to be able to find out more about her, because they built their own houses, and they got knocked around a little bit. They didn't get along with family, and they kept moving, but they always ended up on their feet, and very good. And the descendants, who may be still in Redwood City, I don't know, I had not pursued that, were very, very, very welcome residents of the town. So it was a very upbeat experience all the way through. No blemishes. So, does that answer
Thank
your
you.
question?
Yes, thank you.
All right.
Okay, and the last family to own this beautiful place were the Taylor family. And we're very lucky to have Trish Taylor here to tell us a little bit about what it was like to be here. And Trish, can you start off by telling us how it was that your family came to own this place?
Okay.
Oh, is this the shift part? Okay. Do you guys remember you have to shift?
Can I get out of the sun
Physically.
What we need to do because of camera angles is everybody has to stand up and move one chair. Take your names with you, and your water. Carl, you can come around here.
Sorry about that, Bill. I thought that somehow because all the microphones were here, we weren't going to have to shift.
What I don't need.
All All right. See, now if you're missing the Stanford game, you see they're shifting right now too. So now we're shifting. Sure. No,
I'll get in the, is it cooler down here? But they figured they had room there, now
okay, so I have to remember to get a shift every time. So the question to Trish was, how is it that the family came to own the property?
Well, my grandfather, Benjamin Grant Taylor, was the clerk of the Supreme Court of California, and my grandfather was Benjamin Grant Taylor, and he was a clerk of the Supreme Court of California, and a secretary in the Supreme Court was Henry Finkler. And when Mr. Finkler acquired the property from Mr. Isaacs and lived here for some time, making some improvements, as I understand, outbuildings and so forth. But his wife died, and he became very despondent, so he lived on for 2 or 3 more years, I believe, and then invited some officials, including a mortuary director, I believe, out to tour the property and the house, and then went up the little ravine and shot himself. And he willed the property jointly to my grandfather and to another clerk in the Supreme Court named Purcell. And eventually my grandfather bought out Purcell, so he owned the property straight out. So until Grandpa bought out Purcell, my understanding from my Uncle George, who's here, and my mom, Betty Lou Taylor, son and daughter of B. Grant Taylor, until he bought out Purcell for 3 years or so, I think that there was a contest of the will going on, and some other things were going on. So they shared the house. They took alternate summers and lived in the house. And George told me the other day that they always hated to occupy the house the summer after the Purcells had been there because they left dirty sheets on the beds. So, but Grandpa bought out Purcell and therefore owned the property. And I don't know exactly when he took up residence here with Kate, his wife, my mom's mother, and but I do know that he was living in this house during the war, and when my parents married, it's just a fluke that my mom's name is Taylor. She married a Taylor. So the Taylor name she carries isn't really the B. Grant Taylor. She's Elizabeth Louise Taylor Taylor. So my dad was with the American Red Cross, and during the war he was sent to take care of operations of the Red Cross in China, India, and Burma. And at that time, her folks were growing older and sort of infirm. So Mom and I had an older sister who passed away in her youth, but Mom and my sister Carol moved into the house to help care for the elder Taylors. And then when Daddy came home from China, he just moved right in, and I was born into that household. My brother was born into that household, and we grew up in the house that had been Finkler's home. So that's how I landed there.
So what was it like to be a child growing up in this wonderful place?
It was amazing. It was truly amazing. I don't think as a child I appreciated it as much as I do now in retrospect, because I went to school with kids who lived in houses with sidewalks and street lights and had trick-or-treaters and things like that, and we lived out here in the boondocks where nobody came. And as a result, though, we created our own amusement and mischief, and a great deal of it over the years, truly. And I had a partner in crime that you'll talk to, who lived in the house, the only house that remains that was on the periphery of the property that's down this road here. And she and I were like joined at the hip and engaged in multi-faceted mischievous acts around here.
Well, is it true that spotting of a UFO over Redwood City had something to do with?
Yes. That was the missing brother. He's in L.A. He couldn't be here. But my brother Mike is 4 years younger than I am, and he also had his creative ways of amusing himself. And he developed a society with one other boy, and they named it the Baywood Glen. This place is officially, where the house was officially named Baywood Glen. with the state, and they called it the Baywood Glen Rocket Society. And if any of you ever saw the movie October Sky, it sort of parallels life here with my brother. And yes, he built, basically, I guess you'd call it a hot air balloon. It had cross pieces made of balsa wood, and it was attached to one of those clear plastic laundry bags you get from the dry cleaners. It was sealed at the top, so the cross pieces held it together at the bottom, and he mounted birthday cake candles on the cross pieces, and then he lit them, and it rose from here, and it went way over Palomar Park. I know, because one of our neighbors in Palomar Park was very excited about a UFO that they saw. So yeah, that was my brother. That was one of his many contributions to our amusement.
And you had a sort of a famous Jeep, too, didn't the family have?
Willie's Jeep, that others will speak of here. That's what I learned. We learned as kids to drive on that Jeep. It belonged to my uncle, a 1946 Jeep, and it was the workhorse on the property. It went way up on top of the hill and brought down stones to build the rock wall that's now encloses a picnic area. And it was used to haul alfalfa and hay and grain up to the barn for the goats and the cows and the pig. And that's how we learned to drive.
So your family built that rock wall then?
My dad did, yeah. The rocks, as I understand it, George tells me that Henry Finkler was an insomniac. And in the night when he couldn't sleep, he'd go way up on top of the hill and gather rocks and just put them in a pile. So they were nicely arranged there, and then Daddy could go up in the Jeep and load the Jeep and bring the rocks down. So that was kind of a joint effort, I guess you could say.
And people try to visualize where the house was. Can you kind of
Oh, perfectly. If anybody knows where the public restrooms are up there, exactly on that spot, the big old Victorian house. Yeah.
And there's a story about a calf that was stuck in a cistern?
Yeah. My dad was sort of he was a social worker. Both my parents were social workers trained at Berkeley, but he was a frustrated farmer. He had his garden, his vegetable garden, and he bought a milking shorthorn cow from someone down around Watsonville. And she met up with a bull somewhere up on top of the hill that produced a black and white calf. And that calf came to a kind of an unfortunate end, but subsequently he had her bred to a shorthorn bull, and she produced a calf named Clover, a beautiful little red calf. And when she was about 6 months old, we had also a Hereford that he bought up at the stock, auctions up in South San Francisco. And the 3 cows would go from the barn, which was relatively near the house. They'd go up on top of the hill during the day and come down at night to be fed. And one night, Clover, the calf, didn't come back. And she was about 6 months old. And we looked everywhere. We went up on the hill, and it's a major hike, but we went all over looking for that calf. I think you were part of that search party. And ultimately, for some reason, we decided to go up to, there was an open reservoir or cistern that produced the water that went to the gardens and things. It held.
It looked like a small cement swimming pool.
Right. It was like an unfinished swimming pool, but it wasn't, maybe it was about 20 feet long and 15 feet wide or something. And it had rough cement walls that had rebar sticking up periodically around. And I don't know, as a last resort, we kind of went up there and poked our heads in, and she was in there. She had fallen in early in the day, and the miracle that she didn't drown was that her halter had a ring and it caught on one of those rebar pieces that was sticking up. And she had been there virtually, it must have been all day, because you know how a calf's hoof is cloven. The side of her hoof was just worn away where she'd been pawing at the side of this rough cement wall. But George jumped in the water. I think the rest of us pulled and he pushed, and we got her out. And there was a little cottage on the property above where that rock wall and picnic area are that was rented to an English nurse. And she warmed up bricks in her oven, and we got quilts and things and put the bricks in the quilts and wrapped them around the calf, and she stayed there all night. And the next morning she was good to go. But,
No, thank you,
Sure.
Trish. I must say that you probably all have questions that you'd like to ask Trish, and there's going to be 20 minutes at the end of the program, so that we'll make sure that the audience will be able to ask questions too.
Okay.
But for now, did you have one last word? Or?
not particularly.
Okay,
no.
so I'm going to ask you to shift then.
Okay.
I remember this time.
You were hoping to stay in the shade, huh?
Okay, so now we're going to be hearing from Peggy Yates, who is Trisha's friend here, and you had shared lots of adventures.
We did.
Well, could you tell us about one, or?
Well, my family moved to the house. Oh, my family moved to the house that still exists there in 1947. I was actually born in Hawaii because my father was stationed there. But we have pictures of my 2-year-old birthday party, my 3-year-old birthday party, and all of them include the Taylors because that was what we did. And as we got old enough to be let loose on our own, the Taylor's house was much more fun than my house. It was, you've seen the pictures, I'm sure. It was 3 stories tall. It had a stairway that didn't go anywhere and basement rooms full of stuff that we explored. Trish's father grew mushrooms down there. And we were probably the only Girl Scouts in San Mateo County who had poultry badges and dairy badges and horse badges because George was really good at patiently teaching us to do things and allowing us the time that the Girl Scout badges required to earn the badge. 6 weeks of milking goats, that kind of thing. But it was great fun, and because we were the only ones there, we spent time riding bicycles around what we call the triangle. The road from here to Taylor's house and then down to my house, and then this road that still exists was the triangle that went around Darby's field. Darby was a horse that was rented the use of the field. And we rode horses around that triangle, and there are stories about her brother Mike driving the family car around the triangle and getting in trouble for it. We did things like walk to community store, or
Emerald Market now.
it's now Emerald Market, or borrow a horse, which we were told not to do, and go to the market. And unfortunately, Betty Lou was coming home from somewhere that day, and we got caught. We built forts. We my husband is an old car guy now, and he just cringes that we sawed the shift lever off of an old Packard so we could make a fort out of it.
The steering wheel.
And the steering wheel too. I'd forgotten that. We would walk up onto the hill, spend hours walking around the hill, find where the horses were. There were what, 4 horses?
4 or 5 at one
4 or 5 horses, and we would carry a halter with us, and we would go looking for the horses. And then once we found the horses and put on a halter, we would have to walk another 3 miles to find a rock tall enough that we could get onto it so we could get onto the horses. But it was a wonderful way to grow up. There were rattlesnakes in the area, and every adult in the area, whoever killed a rattlesnake, then summoned all the kids to say, you see that snake, if you ever see a snake like that out in the woods, don't go near it, it's a rattlesnake, yada yada. So I consequently grew up afraid of all snakes, just translated to all snakes. I know that when they were starting to put in Highway 280, or starting to think about putting in Highway 280, they did surveys, and one of the surveys ran along the ridge of the hill. They subsequently put it down at the bottom of the hill, but there were surveyor stakes, and we didn't think there should be a highway on our hill. So we went up and we pulled up all the surveyor stakes we could find, broke them in half, tore up the ribbons, tossed them into the bushes, and then we proudly went down and told Betty Lou what we'd done, and she went, oh, you can't do that. You go back and put those all back. Well, there was no way, but fortunately they didn't ever need them real badly, apparently. So we had a wonderful, wonderful time growing up.
So you mentioned horses. Were there other kind of farm ranch animals that were here on the property?
There were the 4 horses and the 3 cows, and I don't remember how many goats. The goats would always have baby goats in the winter. It was probably early spring, but it was muddy. And the little baby goats, you'd go up to the barn, and there they would be lying in the mud. So we would gather them up, take them down to the house, and there was a big screen porch that was kind of I don't suppose it was the formal front door, but it was the front door of the house. And there were big old steamer trunks, the kind that people put their clothing in when they took voyages down there, and those became baby goat crates, and we fed them with baby bottles from milk taken from the mothers. But yes, there was Desdemona the pig. There was a pail called the pig pail under the kitchen sink, and all the garbage went in there. And once a day it was carried up and fed to Desdemona, who was, by the time we knew, I don't remember her as ever being little. She was as big as this table or bigger.
Yeah, she actually had a spare rib.
She was huge. But anyway, let me think. There were guinea fowl and peacocks and chickens and geese and rabbits and cats and dogs and pigeons. We raised pigeons once, supposedly, for squab. It wasn't a very successful venture.
Well, thank you. And now I'm going to ask for another shift, please.
And Ricky the dog, yes, that looks like Ricky the dog.
So our next speaker is Carl Whitkey. And Carl, you were living around here and knew the Taylors and so forth. Can you tell us a little bit about your relationship as a neighbor?
First off, we own the property that is this first house here on the corner. And my parents bought the property with 3 other families in 1936. And they lived in the old pump house. This is a shot of the old pump house. And they developed a private picnic area that had cooking and bathroom facilities for 150 people. And that was known as the H. Properties. And I lived the first 5 years of my life. I was born in 1938 and lived the first 5 years of my life in San Francisco, and then moved into the pump house. And the pump house was divided into a public kitchen, a public dining area, and an individual private bedroom for each of the 4 families. And we moved into our bedroom, and 4 of us lived in that one bedroom for 9 years. Then we moved into a new house. That's the house that you now see on the corner. I'm going to have to read my notes as I go here because I'm not that good at remembering things. In 1942, at the age of 4, I took my first hike up into the meadow, and I went up there with my Uncle George, who was a dog trainer, and he knew the Taylors in connection with the fact that the Taylors often sponsored dog training exercises on their property. And so I was actually able to go up to the meadow with my uncle at the age of 4. And on that same day, I remember that we entered into the old house. And I remember vaguely that you walked in the front door and there was a beautiful grand staircase leading to the other rooms in the house. And I remember that the house was a very elegant and very old house. And that's as far as that went. In 1944, most of the structures in the area were old summer homes from San Francisco residents. And most of the wet, cold winter months, the homes were not occupied. And we were in the house the one evening during a very violent thunderstorm, and a warplane came over from this direction and going in that direction. And our family noticed that it was in trouble. It was a 4-engine warplane, and it clipped the mountain up here, lost a wing, and then went across Britain Avenue and into the mountain in that direction. And it turned out that we were the only people that heard that plane go over. That gives you an idea of how remote this was. 1944. I'm sure the Taylors were there, but because of the noise and things, they probably missed it. And the Eights were there. But the only other party that could have heard it was the Miller house, which is way up there on the top of the hill, and they were not home. And there was no structures this way on the mountains that are now occupied by all kinds of individual homes. On that particular crash, one person from the plane apparently made it up to the War Dog training facility. Was about a half a mile up on Belmont Hills up there, and the dogs were very aware of the crash, and they were barking, and with first light, the dogs led them to the crash site, and there was at least 2 members of the crew that were deceased. I don't remember details. My brother, who is sitting up here, he remembers that that one person actually walked out of that. In 1948, the San Mateo County Tuberculosis Hospital, known as the Canyon Sanatorium, was located right up the canyon here. And it's along the edge of what's now the Edgewood Road Park. And the old Cordilleras Road used to wind up here. Instead of Edgewood, it was Cordilleras at that time. And one summer when I was about 10, I took a bicycle ride up there, and the road wove between 6 cabins. And in each cabin, the door was open, and there was one iron lung, and one person laying in the iron lung looking out at me through their mirror as I rode by on my bicycle. That gives you an idea of how, again, things were pretty serious with tuberculosis back at that time. Also up on the hill just beyond that was the Hester Health Home, which was the San Francisco Tuberculosis Home, a very large hospital. I have a photograph of it that will be available to look at later in the day. And that photograph was taken from the meadow across before the structures were destroyed a few years back. Another memory of the time period was of 2 old structures that I saw about a quarter of a mile up the road, up Old Stagecoach Road. Stage Road went up right next to the creek here and up the hill, and that stage road led to the town that was just beyond it there, west, what was the name of the town? Anyway, there was a small town there, lumber mill town, just on what's now Kenyatta Road. And when I first went up into the meadow area there was 2 cabins there, and those cabins were part of a rest area for the stage people. People would get up there, they could get refreshments, and they changed the horses for the stagecoach, and then moved on to places west of where they were then located. Again, those structures fell to the ground, and there's no indication of them any longer. However, about 4 years ago, I knew exactly where they were, and I was looking carefully and found parts of an old wooden stove, and I turned them into the museum here. They've got them somewhere in storage. So if you're interested in looking at that, and I also have some photographs here with some notes on the back, and they show exactly where those cabins were located if you're interested in looking for that area. Back in the 1940s, property that now makes up Edgewood Road was owned by several individual property owners, as I recall. Some of the larger parcels where the property were owned by absentee property owners, so I never knew the names of any of them. But among the owners of names that I knew were the Taylors, the Hesters, Coe, Perry, Westfall, Wells, and Yates. And most of these owners had small orchards on their parcels. The main fruits that I remember were apples, plums, olives, apricots, and cherries. Several of the property owners raised chickens, ducks, and rabbits. There was a large hatch of chickens and rabbits right at the base of the canyon right here, and I used to take care of them when the owner went on vacation. Larger parcel owners had horses, cows, occasional hog I saw up there, and for a brief period of time, a large herd of sheep. They pulled the sheep away because they were damaging the property. They were eating too close to the ground and doing too much damage. And there were some goats. I already mentioned that the northern edge of what's now Edgewood Park was San Mateo tuberculosis home, and the hill north of the San Mateo hound, the tuberculosis home was shown up there. I have this photograph specifically that I took, and this is a before photograph, and right next to it is an after photograph. So in each case, when you look at these, you can see photographs with a date behind when I took the photograph, and then right next to it, a photograph that I took about a month ago from the same general location. Along the west edge of the park, including many acres that are now part of the park, was the San Francisco watershed property. That was not open to the public. We had a war going on. They were afraid that people were going to poison the water supply. Specifically, the watershed property fence ran along the ridge line such that any rainwater that drained west of the drinking water reservoirs was part of the watershed land in general, not in every case. On the south edge of what's now Edgewood Road Park, just south of where the PG&E now has its electric transformers and high power lines, and where the elementary school of the town of West Union was once located, and that's right out here. Go over Edgewood, go make a left and watch for a placard, and you'll see the placard for West Union. And next to that, on that south side of the park, was a picnic area owned by the San Francisco Swiss Club. And it was a large picnic area, and they sponsored annual events out there. So that was one of the things that was in the next canyon where the park ends, and there's a little bit of a ridge, and then in the next canyon, they owned that property. Along most of the east edge of the property were summer homes owned by people that lived in San Francisco. A lot of them were members of the lake that's up over the hill here. And they typically did not occupy those homes during the cold, wet months. That's why it was so void of people up here in the winter months. In 1967, the state of California purchased the property for $4 million under eminent domain proceedings for the purpose of constructing a college. In 1979, the state abandoned the college plan and sold the property to the county of San Mateo. And shortly thereafter, the county, on the recommendation of the ranger then supervising the use of the land, offered our family the opportunity to place the Katie M. Wetke bench on a choice view located by the park ranger. And now, if you've been here for any years, you can remember the old bench up there. That was the first bench. It was removed last year after being on site for 22 years. I maintained the bench. It's in excellent condition. When they were ready to relocate it, they didn't recognize my name, and for whatever reason, it was passed on to another family that has another memorial bench on that location now. And the original bench is on my front porch in Redwood City, still in good condition. It was a beautiful bench, hand-carved with carvings of poppies, my mother's name, and her range of years that she lived. In 1993, the land was officially designated as a natural preserve, in case you don't know that. Finally, I want to mention several of the memories of plants, birds, and animals that I accumulated over the last 75 years. Let me ask, how many of the people in the audience here have seen a rattlesnake in this park? Okay, so pretty common. I saw 5 in this park. The first one was right on this side of the bridge, right there. One up under the brush between Edgewood Road and the meadow. one on the ridge and 2 on the other side of the ridge. I mentioned 2. It's very important for you to understand that at a certain time of the year, the rattlesnakes hang out in pairs. And if you see one, don't just jump back and jump into the other one. I have seen 2 rattlesnake on 3 different occasions, not once in this park and other times in other places. So that's just something to be aware of as a hiker. I saw, let's see, mountain lions. I saw a mountain lion in the flashlight raiding the Taylor's chicken coop. My brother and I came out with the flashlight. We heard the chickens making noise. We got his eyes in the flashlight. Couldn't see too much of him. Next morning we went up there. It was a Monday morning, and we could see big mountain lion paw prints. So that was a big one. The second time, right after they built Edgewood Road, I walked up there when they had closed the road because of the rain slides and mud about that deep, and a mountain lion must have passed just minutes ahead of me and walked through there. Big mountain lion. The bobcats were common in this area. Coyotes were pretty common, and rabbits, both the small and the large jackrabbit, very common. There was lots of squirrels and lots of gophers and a few other animals. With birds, I saw a big owl up in the meadow that hung out up there, and I saw the barn owls in the barn over here. Hawks and turkey buzzards.
Thank you, Carl. And I think you've brought some photos and things for us to. You're gonna share with those with us a little bit later. I hope when we have our reception. Yeah, good. Okay. I'm going to ask for the shift again, please. Okay, our next speaker is Jim Bigelow, and Jim is a boy. You were a farmhand here or a ranch hand, weren't you? Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that's the idea. A little story. First of all, I was in the Boy Scouts, Troop 143 in Redwood City, and I had gone through a lot of scouting stuff, and I got really interested in the wilderness. And then I graduated out of Monroe Elementary, and I needed to go to Hoover Junior High School. And the day it was time to go to school, a yellow school bus pulled up. And the yellow school bus was driven by none other than George Taylor. And over the first few couple of weeks, I kept talking to him because he said he had a ranch up in the hills, and I was interested in the hills and getting out to the wilderness. So, where is this? And he told me where it was. And then at 13 years old, I had a bicycle, and I drove from D Street in Redwood City up to the Taylor Ranch. And he had a dog, Rick, that was a beautiful German police dog, very friendly. And then he had a routine. George had a routine. You had all this property. And there's a lot to do. You can imagine on your own yard in a suburban house what you have to do. When you come up here and you have all this acreage, you have endless work. So I would come up most every Saturday and work all day, go with George in the Jeep and Rick the dog, and we would go all around the hills doing our thing. And then as I got older, I actually got to where I could drive the Jeep. And George was very good about letting me drive this Jeep with him in it or just by myself. So There's some very challenging hills here because we took shortcuts through ditches and up the hill and so forth. And we carried a lot of different equipment to work on projects. Now, Mr. Conservation, sitting over here in the green coat. So what happens? No power tools. There were never any power tools. If you had to remove a fallen tree, you had a two-man saw, and you pulled on each end, and you cut the thing up into pieces. It would come down to the house and it would become firewood. If you had too much mistletoe in a tree, you'd want to cut some of that out because that would do the tree in eventually. So everything that happened, there were no power tools. All the years that I worked up here, there were no power tools. And everything was by hand, bow saw or these pull saws, hand drills, whatever it was, for maintaining the barn, the fences, the chicken coops, the areas up on top, and so forth. The other thing that was striking, my grandparents live in a town called Glenville, Nebraska. Only 300 people. No electricity. This is at the time this was occurring. They didn't have electricity. They had outhouses. And they grew everything, and they swapped with the farming community that they were part of. So when you come to the Taylor Ranch, the Taylors have chicken coops, fresh eggs, fresh chicken. The chicken, as they got done laying the eggs and got a little further along, they would become dinners for a considerable period of time. There was a blackberry patch. When you go up this U-shaped road where the house used to be, the Jeep trail went up from where the house, between the two houses, and there were huge blackberry vines. And you could pick those, and they made fantastic pies. They had goats. They did some goat cheese. They had gardens, and they grew stuff. So when you would come from D Street, which was a little suburbia at the time, up to the Taylor Ranch, it was going back in time and to the very basics, and everybody was very happy. The kids that were up here, the neighbors, everybody was really nice. We used to go down once in a while in this Jeep and with a trailer and Rick in the back. And when you would go down to Perry Feed? You go downtown to Perry Feed, you look like the Beverly Hillbillies coming into town. Everybody was looking, who in the heck is that? Where did they come from? It was George Taylor, myself, and Rick down to get some stuff to haul it back up. So the true use of a Jeep, instead of what you see today, he truly had a Jeep that worked. And I believe it's still working in another park setting.
I have no idea. It was the first Jeep after the war, so it had a heavy 400-pound block in front, so it never turned over, but it would side slip. So you had to go straight up the hill, or if you went sideways, you hit a tree, you had to cut it down to get it going again.
And that has happened. Okay, so my experience through my teenage years and so forth was fantastic to be able to compare life on the flatlands to what it was up here. And as I close, I got involved in search and rescue with the Civil Air Patrol and the Air Force. And towards the end, the Taylors were good enough to let us go up with our ground rescue teams, and we practiced ground search and rescue. And we came by with a big twin-engine airplane doing airdrops and stuff as part of our exercise. So the Taylors were a fantastic family. They were conservationists much earlier than most, and George is very instrumental in steering me in a lot of things I've accomplished to stay focused and get the job done. So thank you much, George.
And thank you, Jim. And we're going to have a switch in panels now. And before our first panelists go away, could you give them a little hand? Because thank you. Great job. And as the next panel comes in, I could say that this is the transition now in our plan was now from private ownership now into public ownership. You heard that in 1967, the state of California became interested in this property for placement of a college, and that didn't quite work out. And by 1980, this was acquired by San Mateo County. And so if our next panel could come in.
Yes. Bob Emmer.
Stand up for just a second.
Ca-
Can you stand up?
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. This is a good time for this. Don't go too far away, but if you, yes, absolutely, stretch your legs. The stone seats I know are hard.
Okay. Sit down. I think maybe we'll just do one at a time. Let them come up one at a time.
Parks superintendent and many other kinds of things for the parks here, and has many memories about Edgewood. And Bob, do you want to talk about some of your earliest memories first?
I might as well. Sometimes I don't need these things, sometimes I do. But you're going to have to bear with me a little bit, because the only thing worse than my hearing is my memory right now. And dredging some of this stuff up took a little thought. But feel free to correct anything that's wrong. My first experience with Edgewood was, middle 60s, around 1965. And Bob Allen, the city manager of I was working for the city of San Carlos at the time as a park supervisor. And Bob Allen, the city manager, asked me to put together 5 or 6 four-wheel drive vehicles to take the State College Board on a tour of this site. And as I understood it at the time, silly me, I had to ask, why is San Carlos getting involved in this site? So they said, well, Redwood City's really not interested in having a site up there. They weren't getting any support, the State College weren't. It appeared they wanted to develop the hills up here in Redwood City like they did in Menlo Park, Palo Alto, Belmont, with office space and commercial space for the tax base. Bob's thinking, Bob Allen, the city manager, was that if they could get a state college up here, San Carlos would be able to punch a road through from Crestview Drive to the roadside rest and have access to 280. And that was the motivation for sending me up here with a bunch of site surveyors. Beautiful day up here. They went down to Mountain View from here, fogged in, and within a few days we knew that they had selected this site. Fortunately. Otherwise, you might have office space up here. In the middle of the late 70s, my sons were riding motorcycles on the site. I remember. Yeah. Fortunately, George didn't throw me out one time when I came to visit him years later. But, well, the common belief and the conventional knowledge at the time was that the state was just going to bulldoze this site like was done at Cañada and up in San Bruno and wherever they built on a hillside. They just come in with the bulldozers and make flat places. And I had gone to work for the county in 1970, and so about 1975, I guess, is when this got to be, it really began to be a problem. I'd become aware, working for the county, I'd become aware of the damage that was being done throughout the county by these off-road vehicles. So I took a little trip on my own up here, and I was just amazed at the damage that had been done in the 10 years since my previous visit. I'm glad to hear that George drove a Jeep up there. That makes me feel a little bit, but not much. they had really destroyed the site, and what they didn't do, erosion was starting to do. By the late 70s, the state lost interest in this site, as was reported. At that time, the motorcyclists that my sons hung around with really believed that the city of Redwood City was going to get the site and develop it in some fashion. So we heard all kinds of plans that were going to happen to this site. And during the debate over the golf course at Filoli, I was a part of an informal group after that meeting, one of the meetings, commenting, and the general consensus of this group was that a golf course would be better at Edgewood than it would be at Filoli. Now, none of us in that group, or not many people outside of that group, had any idea what was up here. It's just that it was one way to get the pressure off of Filoli. Well, let's see. I tell you, to my knowledge, that I heard from about that time, there were only a few people had any idea what was up here. One of them was Dr. Ehrlich from Stanford, and the other was Suzanne Summers. And Suzanne bent my ear significantly to convince me, although it didn't take a lot of convincing that we had to do something, but the county didn't own it yet. Get a few notes here. After the pressure was off Filoli, a great debate ensued over the putting of a golf course at the site. Huge effort by any number of individuals. When the state said this site was available, any number of individuals and groups wanted the county to acquire the site for a facility that would accommodate their specific interests. And I can remember a motorcycle park, a golf course, hikers, equestrians, open space enthusiasts, Olympic swimming pool promoters. At one time, they talked about putting the Humane Society up here. At one time, we talked about putting a facility that eventually went to Coyote Point. Would have been a nice location for that. Anything you could, a paint drying test area, because of the southern sun up here. I think it was Fuller Paint, but I'm not sure. They thought it'd be a great place to paint test strips out there, put it out in the summer sun, and see what paints worked. But at that time, if you named an activity, Edgewood was the best site for it. So tremendous pressure to acquire the site. Now, after the county acquired the site in 1980, it became my responsibility to organize a ranger patrol to prevent off-road use. Yeah, sure. Me and a bunch of rangers out here with a badge and a good pair of hiking boots, and we're going to get those motorcycles out. Well, Mike, you were here, weren't you? You were one of the first rangers. Tom, Ron, who else? Dave Moore. That was pretty much the key group that took on the motorcycles. Our biggest claim to fame was we were able to reduce this use, but not eliminate it. The hardcore motorcyclists would just, they're gone. We caught guys from Hayward, from Alameda, from Livermore. The sheriff did. So the county Parks Department purchased some off-road motorcycles for use by the sheriff's department. And some of those young sheriffs had been riding motorcycles up here for years, and they knew every trail. And when they got to do the chasing instead of being the chaser instead of the chasee, most of those motorcyclists couldn't get away from them. And we used the motorcycles here and on San Bruno Mountain. Took almost a year, but with the help of the motorcycle deputies, we finally got control on, gradually eliminated it. It took a long time because people were coming from all over the Bay Area.
So, Bob, you have a kind of a last wrap up that you can.
Yeah, I guess so. The golfers were more difficult to deal with than the motorcyclists. Most of all the golfers, including some of the Board of Supervisors members, believed that the property was actually purchased for a golf course. A lot of pressure on the Park and Recreation Commission. Nita, were you on the commission at that time, or was that a little
No,
before?
but I remember the war, and I remember the rows and rows of men who expected a green fee of about $9 would be plenty.
Yeah. So we, I don't know how many plans were developed for a golf course, and none of them were able to pass the EIR reports. One thing I can't remember for sure, but the home that George lived, I met with George a couple of times at the home, and as I recall, the golf course had been put to rest and was not going to happen, and we were not allowed to develop a plan for a park until that occurred. Well, once it became not just a responsibility to get rid of the motorcycles, but the responsibility to get develop a park, we met with George, and I think sometime after that, Harry Dean and did a plan, and the house was demolished. It had fallen into pretty poor repair. I was convinced it could be saved, but every nickel we had was going into the barn over at Wunderlich for that kind of thing. Well, the reason they were even considering a community college was because right after World War II, the troops came home and started to have families. And right about 20 years later, you had this massive influx of people who had to have some sort of college education. So that's when they started thinking, well, we better have a community college up here. But it didn't happen. Well, firstly, money was a consideration. Community colleges were important to the whole community, but people didn't want to pay for it. They didn't want to pay taxes for it. That meant more taxes. And so the idea to establish it just sort of fell by the wayside. Which was a shame. You had all these kids trying to get some place to go for an education, but it didn't happen. So
Okay, I think we're going to be moving to the next panelist now. And that's Carolyn Curtis. If you could come up, please. Thanks, Bob.
big feet out of there. There you go, Carolyn.
Carolyn, you're noted to be an organizer of the early coalition to save this place. Why was it?
Me.
Why was that necessary?
Well, I was president of the local chapter of the Native Plant Society, and we knew there was, yes, there's serpentine here. No one's brought that up yet. That's a big deal. It's 1% of the soils in the whole state. It's a rare soil type, and where there's rare soil types, there are rare plants, which is right up the Native Plant Society's alley, because they tend to be natives and that have adapted to this very harsh soil. It's high in magnesium and iron and nickel, and low in stuff plants need like calcium and nitrogen because there's no buildup. So Suzanne Summers, who lived around the corner from the Sunset entrance in those days, was the first one who built the plant list for this park and alerted the Native Plant Society, and we had hikes in here. We had trainings to lead hikes, to be docents. And there's a bunch of first class of our docent training sitting right out there. But so this was something we kind of adopted, this place, especially the serpentine parts, but also the woods, which is 2/3 of it. So anyway, we have a plant sale and wildflower show every spring, and it's at Foothill. And Jan Simpson, who lived down the road from here and was in here practically every day, brought to that 1991 plant sale, wildflower show, excuse me. Seems to me it was a petition for golfers to sign saying, let's get this going, we can have our golf course there. And there was an article in the paper shortly thereafter, too. So she was the one that sounded the alarm. We'd been down this road before, because there was, as Bob mentioned, an EIR for a golf course in '87, I think it was. And it was defective, and the Native Plant Society sued, and they settled out of court. And there were a bunch of provisions, which some were honored and some maybe not so much. So anyway, we thought it's revving up again, basically, obviously. And I had worked in political campaigns. I was a staffer in a grassroots campaign for 18 months in a congressional district. There was 6 counties all the way up to the Oregon border. So I knew a little about grassroots organizing by the time I was done with that. And we knew the fights before had always been just environmentalists over here and golfers over there. And we knew that Edgewood had a bigger constituency than just tree huggers, like neighbors who would just pop over, or horseback riders and runners and photographers. And so we contacted all the, Sierra Club and Audubon and all the likely suspects and whoever else we could think of, kind of a committee for Green Foothills, all the enviro groups. And we had a big meeting, and we brainstormed what other groups, homeowner groups, who are they? Who do we know? A lot of people at that meeting knew the people or were the people at that very meeting. So we made up a list, and who was going to contact whom. Action items right away. A small group of us went aside kind of toward the end and drafted a mission statement, very concise right then. No, fooling around for months with that stuff. John Allen was there, as I recall. I said we have to have some kind of identification for when we go speak at public meetings. Another member who was a Native Plant Society, who was a professional artist, Gene Struthers, came up with a bumper sticker. I was drafting and churning out propaganda. We decided there had been a petition in the 1980s, which the Native Plant Society had done, that gotten 4,000 signatures. And we were going to do that again. Now that's hard. You need to organize people to be there regularly. But we were in that parking lot every weekend from early September into March, except when it was a monsoon and we couldn't. With our petition that had 25 lines on it, just 3 sentences, just leave Edgewood alone, make it a preserve. And we ended up with over 14,000 signatures. We started with just a handful of volunteers, mostly Native Plant Society people, mostly neighbors, and there's some of them here. And it snowballed, because people were saying things like, we would stop people in the parking lot, and we'd say, "Have you heard that the Board of Supervisors just voted to put a golf course on Edgewood?" And they'd say things like, "Over my dead body," or "Have they heard of recall?" And we'd say, here's the next meeting, Tuesday morning. Here's where they, Board of Sup's chamber, and people would show up. We would never coordinate who was going to say what. People spoke from the heart. We never knew who was going to show up. It was different every time. The golfer group, it was the same voices over and over, the same few people. And also Suzanne is a very talented photographer, and she has been photographing Edgewood for years. She had been already. And she had big pictures, 14 by 18. We had a press conference when we finally got up to like 25 organizations, including homeowners, the horseback riders, etc., this broad, diverse coalition. We had a press conference with a press packet, thanks to Julia Bott, who knew how to do that kind of thing. with a picture and the bumper sticker and articles on wildflowers at Edgewood, et cetera, list of the organizations, list of the rare plants, the butterfly, which we haven't even talked about yet. But anyway, we were prepared, and we had these big pictures, and I'll never forget the reporter, Cindy Chorness, who worked for the Peninsula Times-Tribune, saying, "Where is this place?" And we'd say, 3 miles away from here as the crow flies. And this was at downtown. And whenever she wrote about Edgewood, she'd say, well, and in the spring, streets of wildflowers that draw visitors from, there were 100,000 people visiting already in those days. So that was one thing we pushed too. Let's see, how am I doing? What
Can you sum it up?
So anyway, it snowballed, yeah. And we would have school children writing letters to the editor. We had these handouts that say, here's how to write to the address, et cetera. Who's here to phone? Here's the next meeting. Here's the latest article from the newsletter, on and on. We had our first defection in December. That was one of the supervisors. And by April, there were 4. And that was all we needed. We really only needed 3. It went up and down a couple times. And that's another whole story. I brought an exhibit which has a lot of stuff, printed reprints of the articles, et cetera. I'm not expecting anybody to read all that prose, but you get an idea of the kind of fight it was. We had 100 volunteers, active volunteers, getting signatures. And at events like 10K races, golfers would sign this thing. They'd say, we need another golf course, but not here. So we had a lot of allies. There were 200,000 members in the coalition when you counted it up. There were, by the time we ended, 43 organizations and I think 12 businesses or more, little businesses. We could have gotten more of those. Great fun. We knew we were going to win. We knew we were right. We knew this place had a constituency, and boy, were we right. So, and then that, we closed, when we won, when it became a joint powers agreement between Mid-Penn and the county, sewed up so that no one organization can screw it up again. Then we declared victory and became the Friends of Edgewood Natural Preserve.
Thank you, Carolyn. I think next time I get into a fight, I want Carolyn on my side. So next on my list is Lenny Roberts. Is Lenny?
Lenny's not here.
Okay, she's not here. That gets me back on time. I mean, I really wanted to hear from Lenny, but that's okay. So our next speaker then is Susan Summers Edwards, a naturalist. As a naturalist, what was your role in the preservation effort, Susan?
I'd like to say hello, greetings, and thank you to all of you and all the heroes who have stepped forward for Edgewood. My role is that of a student and a scholar. And as I found out things and learned things, I shared my knowledge to educate and provoke concern and love of Edgewood and its resources. The day I came to Edgewood, I had been compressed by 5 years of very hard luck. There wasn't much light in me or my life. But a friend, lady who lived around the corner from Edgewood, gave me a place to stay. I took my dog out for a little walk, and we went through this dirt road with this big tunnel through the chaparral. And he stopped ahead of me, and he gave a big, and he was still bigger than he was when he got to that site, and he dashed off. I thought, oh boy, we're in it now. What is this? And I did the very same thing when I got there. It was May. The fields of serpentine wildflowers were in full bloom, so dense you couldn't see the grass between the two hills, the South Hill, the Central Ridge. And the glorious presence of Edgewood filled me with such jubilee and elation and joy. All darkness vanished. That was a great gift God's grace. And I knew that there was something here of value. I was interested in plants, how they were used. I'd grown up on the peninsula, and I'd seen the fields where I played turn into hospitals, the forests where I romped turn into houses, parking lots. So I was seeing this world lose and go away. And that doubled my impression and value of Edgewood, resources and its beauty. So, my godmother, this lady, Dorothea Kaufman, was a high school teacher at Sequoia for 31 years. She taught everything else, and her husband taught math. Her father happened to be an early 20th century botanist, Dr. Frederick T. Brioletti, who taught enology west of the Rockies, one of the first doctors to bring wine industry into the secular world. But he had this little book, The Flora of Middle California by Willis Lynn Jepson. And that talked about plants. It was a full manual, where they grew, what animals used them, their importance in the environment. So I started to cut my teeth teaching myself botany, walking on Edgewood. I knew things like oaks and poppies, but what was this? So I plowed myself down to the Redwood City Library and learned. And eventually I got a list. And the Farm Hill School site came up in the 70s. It was a serpentine area. Through the wildflower shows, I learned more and met people. And I talked to them about serpentine flowers at Edgewood. In 1969, I came to Edgewood. In 1970, Henry Scoop Jackson had the legislation that was signed into law and passed into activity in 1970, January 1. That was the National Environmental Protection Act, and also he created the Land and Water Conservation Fund at the same time. This fund gathered monies from offshore oil drilling, which provided funds to municipalities and other public organizations for the preservation and buying natural resources that were of value. This was an important key. This was the lever. This was the big thing that we could all stand on. 1969, the California Native Plant Society was formed. Its founding fathers, one of them was Roman Gankin, who became the environmental planner at the San Mateo County. We had heroes that came forward. Harry Dean, landscape architect from Yosemite. And we had people like Bob Emmett, whose ear got bent only because he was so tall. In 1974, the Native Plant Society published their first list of rare and endangered plants. On that list, there were 3 plants that I had on my list. And then it started. I picked up my pen, I focused my camera, and I talked and walked with everybody and anybody I could. Organizations that led to dog and pony shows, of slideshows and lectures, followed by walks. The early walks were on Edgewood, 4-hour jaunts, 2 a day, on both days of the weekend. And a lot of people walked through the muck and the mud and the rain, and it was a real citizen's adventure coming forward. We had angels and saints like Jan Simpson and her husband, who provided so much support and nurturing for people who wanted to learn about the park. I took the environmental impact report came out. I was working in a mixed camp of half-time with a real estate company and half-time for a lawyer. boy, did I get language. And this gentleman would come into the office occasionally, and he was talking to me one day as I was writing up my environmental EIR complaint, which was 14 pages. And we talked, and I stated to him that without proper planning, facts, and basic ecological principles included in the framework, no proper planning nor use of our resources could be properly and wisely used. This gentleman came over, leaned over the typewriter, and kissed me on the cheek. This was in 1970, early 70s. That man was William Lane of Sunset Publishing. And for a long time, he cast a constant eye watching what we were doing. And through grace, we got here.
Thank you very much.
I just wanted to conclude with that I know now, wherever I go, I know that Edgewood's glory will not pass from this earth. Thank you all.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ricardo Trujillo. Trejo? Okay. Ricardo? Oh. Now, Ricardo, you were here at an early time as far as the county is concerned. You want to tell us about some of your adventures here?
Well, every time I used to get in front of some people, I always used to tell them, this is the last war story. But you guys have, I guess, a couple of more. But I was assigned to Edgewood Park in the early 80s, involved with some of the rangers getting the off-road vehicles. During that time, I also met Suzanne Sumners, and she took our supervisor, myself, and Doc to see the thorn mint. And the reason for that is because of the location that it was in. She wanted us to see how we can provide protection from keeping the vehicles from going down in that direction. Another person that I met was, I cannot recall his name, but he was doing a study of the checker spot butterfly in the early 80s. And the only thing I knew about him is that he went to South America to do some other studies. But anyway, I was involved in Edgewood on 3 occasions. One was getting the off-road vehicles. 2 was when the trails came on. Then the day camp. And then the last tour that I did here was when it was a preserve, and I was involved with the Interpretive Center. Now, during that time, there was a number of problems that rangers, or not problems, but things that rangers had to work out with. One was different managements, different budgets, different reasons or job duties or whatever that we had to do. And every time it was always to protect the park from safety hazards, provide services, and so forth. The last tour that I came when it was a preserve was totally a different ball game. And during that time, I met and had a lot of meetings with a lot of the Friends of Edgewood, Native Plant Society people, and we started quite a few programs. By the time the talk of the Interpretive Center came in, we were actually already having many study programs, and we were able to justify an Interpretive Center for education and so forth. The part of land management, it's very difficult. You have to know the land, the terrain, and what type of soils you have, because one rainfall, if you get plenty of rain, right away you have runoff, and that runoff will not seep quick into the soil because of the serpentine, clay soil, and so forth, and therefore you have quite a bit of erosion. At the same time, you have the trails that you have to maintain at a certain way so that you could provide a safe passage for all the people that use Edgewood. So quite a few programs or methods were used to try to meet the trails with the sensitive part of the plants, to try to avoid endangering the habitat of the concerned plants. But all that took a lot of meetings with people from the Friends Native Plant Society, educating the rangers, as well as the rangers educating the concerned groups of why we have to do certain things. In other words, the rangers had to look at Edgewood as a big umbrella, not just specifically focal tunnel vision. So we had to deal with quite a bit of groups and sensitive and so forth.
Thank you very much. Do you want to say thank you to anybody in particular?
Well, I do see quite a few people that help me, volunteers, people from the California Plant Society, Friends of Edgewood, some rangers that I haven't seen for a long time. And I don't know if there's some people out there that remember me, but I've been gone for about 7 years.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Our next speaker is Nick Ramirez. He's going to tell us a little bit about some of the volunteer programs here. I think there's one group in particular, Nick, that you wanted to tell us, a high school group, is that right?
Yeah, that had to do with Carlmont High School. But before I jump into that, I just want to say that at the beginning of my years with the county parks, I worked for a number of different parks, and then I got assigned at Edgewood early on. And I started to meet people with the Friends groups when it first was getting started. And I have a great story about meeting Ellie Hess. And Ellie and I became friends as the years went by. But there was this lady pulling out plants over by the Edgewood Road Teasel plant. So we were on these different patrols, and I go up to this lady and I go, "Excuse me, what are you doing?" She goes, "I'm pulling out these plants. They're not vital to this park anymore." And I go, "Really?" I go, "I don't think you can do that." And then she goes, "No, I can do it." And then I'd say, "No, I don't think you can." We went back and forth. And I was kind of puzzled, and she seemed like a very nice lady, and she was well dressed for the occasion and so forth. And then I decided, I go, "Well, I'm going to have to stop you from doing that." And then she goes, "Well, I think I have permission." I go, "Well, not that I know of." So then she stopped, and then she said she was going to contact her friends, and they get a hold of the park office and then get the permit worked out. And eventually that happened. And then, like I said, through that contact and as years have gone by, I'd have to say that it's the people that affected me out here as much as the park itself. But I started meeting dynamite, energetic, dedicated people that just blew me away. I got this job when I was about 30 years old. I had no background in anything dealing with the environment. I grew up in San Francisco. So when I came out here, I was actually getting educated by these people, almost like a second childhood to me. I actually didn't know hardly anything about the outdoors, and I always remember going up to the top of the park and somebody telling me about all the poppies that were up there. And I got up there in the evening, and I was by myself, And here I am, like I said, in my early 30s, and I'm looking at the flower, and I didn't realize that the flowers closed at night. And I go, wow, this is spectacular. I was getting blown away. So I was going through my other childhood from about 30 years old till about 60. And I was having a great time. Then I started having my own kids, and then they were getting introduced to this scenario. But to me, it's about the people and their dedication that has brought all this to where we're at today. I got involved later in my job as the county parks volunteer coordinator with other friends groups. But this group here, as I became to know some of them pretty well, I'm saying, like I said, it just impacted me about the nature of people when they get something focused and they're really driven, and just good-natured people all the way around. And then I guess I'm going to have to say something about the staff. I know it's not going to sound too good because I got Bob here and some other guys, but I'll tell you the other thing that happened. I started seeing people that knew more about the park environment than the ranger staff themselves. They could identify any plant and tree and take it apart and dissect it and tell you what it was, where we were actually being trained to maintain the parks. So that wasn't our focus. So then I talked to somebody and they would tell me, did you see this particular flower? And I go, no. And they'd be wondering how come we didn't know anything about these flowers. But our focus was quite different. And I credit the volunteers with that kind of knowledge, because that took a lot of personal ambitions, to acquire that. This is people doing things on their free time, weekends, evenings, and so forth. And I go, wow, what a group of people. I was just getting blown away constantly. So these people had actually a great impact on me, And then I'll say something about the Carlmont real quick. That was just a chance meeting where I was down at the parking lot and I was looking at the bulletin board to fix it. And then a lady came up to me and she saw me in uniform. And then she introduced herself, and she happened to be a biology teacher at Carlmont. And she goes, wow, what a great park, and this and that. And I go, yeah. And she goes, I have some students I like to expose to this park, but I'm not sure how. And I go, well, there is an invasive plant removal group that gets together every so often, and maybe you can get involved with that. And then that really took off. She got other teachers involved. We were put in hundreds of hours with those kids, and it really turned out to be a good thing.
Thank you, Nick.
Alrighty.
Nick made the sacrifice of coming over the hill during a pumpkin festival, so thank you. Our final panelist is Julia Bott, who's the executive director of the San Mateo County Parks Foundation. But Julia, your history with Edgewood goes back way beyond that, right?
It certainly does. And I think Carolyn did mention that already, that I was a media coordinator for the Save Edgewood Park Coalition. And I still proudly have my badge from those days. And it lives on a bulletin board of favorite memories. So I thought I'd wear it today. And so I don't need to go into that because Carolyn really did cover that, and I'm the only thing between you and you standing. So I'll keep going. I'll go quickly. But I do want to talk about something that came after that wonderful success story, and something that I wish our elected officials in Washington could learn a lesson from. Bill Royce was one of the golfers who was the primary leader for the golf course. He and I went up against each other a few times during that campaign. In about 1997, we got together along with a few other people and worked collaboratively to form the San Mateo County Parks Foundation. So we agreed to disagree on something, but we worked well together when it came with all the parks, looking forward to all the parks. So fast forward, we have spent now 15 years with the San Mateo County Parks Foundation raising money for the county parks. And since Ricardo did mention the thorn mint, and since when people look at me, they think about raising money for the parks, investing in programs, I have to point out that we have some flyers here for a thorn mint restoration program that's going on. And we have 20 days to raise the remaining $2,500 to reach a $5,000 goal to do some seeding and restoration for the thorn mint this winter. So if you're inclined to do it, there's an opportunity for you to support this effort. We, working with all of the friends, one of the projects that we looked at was building this center. And a lot of people did question whether or not a building was necessary in the park. As Ricardo mentioned, there were a lot of programs going on, and we could really justify the fact that this would be an anchor for the center. And I have to say, looking at all you guys here and seeing the life here does really bring me to tears a bit, makes me very happy. We knew that that would be the outcome. We knew that by having a center, that we would really be able to reach more people when they were out in the parks. We were seeing that the ranger staff was decreasing with the decreased funding that the parks were facing. So volunteers were becoming increasingly more important in terms of reaching folks. And while you have docent-led hikes and you have some trail patrol, it's always nice to greet people right when they come in. So we were lucky enough on a tour one day to find this site, which used to just be poison oak, vinca, and old fruit trees. But it actually was a house. The Wells lived here in the past. And the group of folks said, this is it. This is where to put a center at the entrance to the park. Most of us thought it would be up where the bathrooms are now. And we knew that people, even though they're coming to hike, they won't walk a few extra feet to go into a building. They always want that close parking spot, and why go out of your way? So we found something right at the entrance. It's very inviting. The center's been open for 2.5 years, and more than 20,000 people have come in to visit it. Yeah, so we've done really well in terms of being able to greet the audience in Edgewood. And actually, a lot of the people in the audience are the ones who've done really well, because it was the support of those who love Edgewood, who really brought this building to fruition. Yes, the Korpholz were very responsible for this. Bill was one of those people who kept me going at times when there was no reason to have any hope. And they would say, yes, we have a vision, this makes sense, continue on. And now we have a vision, and this is where more memories are being made. And so for that, I want to thank everyone who's been involved in today and everyone who's going to be involved in the future of Edgewood. Thank you.
Thanks, Julia. You can stand up and give the panel a standing ovation, and you can stretch your legs too. Just a few questions, but before that, Nita has one more thing that she'd like to tell us about.
I'm still a little aggressive, even at this age. I'm still a little aggressive, even at this age. I first came to Redwood City to cover the Redwood City Hall and the county for the old Daily Redwood City Tribune. That was in 1944. So that's a long time ago. I want to tell you that I've never met a couple like the Korpholz who have been working on this since the days you heard these people wanting something to happen. And they are still active. In fact, Bill was kind of the chairman for today. And if you want to meet two people who are going straight up to heaven, no shortcuts, no questions, but they're going right there, talk to Bill and Kathy. They have been superb. The everything from top to bottom on this that anybody's done for this park has been first rate. And I want to tell you, people around in the business, look here and say, wow. So enjoy them. They're with us right now, and you may meet them up there. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. So do we have one question, two questions? Yes.
Mitch, what did you learn from being involved? I just am interested in knowing what you learned from being involved in this project, because I know you've been director. I was on your board years ago. You've been director of the Historical Association for 30 years, right? So you had to spend time all around the county. What did you learn from being involved in this particular project?
Well, just the local happenings. I mean, meeting Trish Taylor and understanding what was here, and the important, I think the important kind of groundbreaking environmental effort that went into this really is quite historical. And these are historical figures, certainly, for what they did to save this land. So I learned a lot. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Was it, I wasn't following too well. Was it a community college or a state college or both?
Well, it was the state of California.
Yeah.
But George, so it's a state so it was going to be a 4-year school or a 2-year school? 4. Okay. So it was meant to be a 4-year school.
Then I have another question. It's a speculation, and you historians may be able to verify it. In 1965, I knew a trustee of the State College Board, and he said to me, "We don't want to put any more colleges on the fringes. We want to put them in central cities where it's public transportation and more people living in central cities can get to them." And my speculation is that it had something to do with their change in plans for this, but I don't know. That's something you can research. You know?
Do you know it?
I'll use this. In the Vietnam War had started, and the California legislature, in order to help boost the economy, which was going into depression or in depression, had legislated that all public school systems had to sell off any properties that were not actively being used as a school. So the Farm Hill school site came up to the government public body agency market first, and then if nobody picked that up after a year, then it would go to the open market for private concerns.
Thank you.
One other person who entered into that.
Well, okay. One more word from Nita, and then we're going to have Bill is going to
There's always room
wrap
for
it
a
up.
P.S. at the end of a letter. Mrs. Roth up at Filoli had something to do with the tip to the success of this program. She was reaching the age where she had to leave her big house, and a big one it is. And so she called the county parks department and said, "I'm going to have to do something with the house. Are you folks interested?" Well, the capital of San Mateo County just about shook down at that point because they thought they were going to get something. And they had to drag the golfers into it. And San Mateo County paid some money. I don't know how much, but they had staff time studying the possibility for a golf course at Filoli. And they came up with these glorious plans and went up to see her. And she unrolled them, and what do you know? They had taken out her front yard. And she didn't like it. She called the county the next day and said, "You know, I think I'm going to do something different." And she did. And she tipped over the whole side of Woodside to support her and the neighborhood. And I said, when I say global, it was in the air. Thank you.
And now to wrap it up is the president of the Friends of Edgewood, Bill Corbels.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me just stand over here. Thank you, Mitch. And I just want to say to Nita, she is the chairperson of my fan club, as you might know. And she always has such wonderful things to say about Kathy and me. You've been a fantastic audience. You've been very patient, and I know that the sun was a little bit difficult at the beginning, but it's now cooled off nicely. But give yourselves a round of applause for coming today and listening to this great panel.
Thank you, Bill.
And to our panelists as well, some of whom have come from as far as out of state or way up in Northern California. Let's give them all a nice round of applause as well. I would also like to thank Mitch Postal, the president of the San Mateo County Historical Association, for being our co-organizer and moderator for today's event. Thank you, Mitch. And many other people helped to, by the way, I just have about 6 pages of notes here that I'm going to go through. And I'm the only thing between you and the vino, so be nice to me. We have some refreshments that are waiting on the back deck. I also want to thank the San Mateo County Parks Department for helping us tremendously today with traffic control and setting up signs and helping us with cleanup and all kinds of stuff. They were terrific. And our organizing committee for this event, in addition to Mitch and me, were Cynthia Schurz, who's maybe, she's organizing that right as we speak. Cynthia, stand up. And Julia Bott as well. Thank you, Julia. And Lori Alexander, our Ed Center coordinator, helped behind the scenes. And my wife, Kathy, who is awaiting you out on the deck, helped with a lot of the setup for the food this afternoon. So you'll enjoy that a little bit later. Also, Trish Taylor and John Baum, sitting right here, who helped with some of the content and the organization of the material. Thanks to them. And finally, to Peninsula TV, our friends who gave us a tremendous economical rate for filming this entire event. Thanks to you guys, too. This event, together with the birthday party that we staged in May, which was organized by our friend Francis Morse here, were the 2 biggest events that we did this year as part of the so-called Year of Edgewood, celebrating 20 years of operations of the Friends of Edgewood and 20 years since the dedication of Edgewood County Park as a natural preserve. And we've attracted well over 100, close to 120 people for these 2 events alone. So we're quite proud of this Year of Edgewood. I'm sure that you have sensed that our panelists have lots more to share with you. They're not done talking yet, and they look forward to interacting with you on a one-on-one basis on the back deck. We have wine, cheese, lots of nice food and goodies for you, and some interesting displays, I think, some old maps and some relics, historical relics that you'll find out there. So at this time, I would invite you to come to the back deck and meet with the panelists and enjoy a social hour back there. Thank you.